Good afternoon. Phil, you've just given your talk, which had a really interesting title. It was...
Sex, Drugs and Pollinator Health.
So that drew quite an audience, didn't it?
That was the intention. Everybody wants to hear about sex and drugs, maybe less of pollinator health, but yeah.
But they got that as well.
But they got that as well, didn't they?
Right. So what led you here? How did you start out in your career? And
well, I started off mostly interested in trying to develop sustainable ways of growing food, with a strong focus on working in the global south. That's why I still travel quite a lot now. And I built up a research group looking at the chemicals in plants, the ones that the chemicals in plants that they use to defend themselves against herbivores, to see if we could use those to help protect crops. So that was where it all started. But the reason why I'm here at the Honey Show is because about 10 years ago, I realized that the chemistry of pollen and nectar was really interesting and really exciting, and I had lots of really interesting ecological stories, as well as I was talking about today, potential health benefits for pollinators.
And what was the focus of your talk?
So plants produce lots of different chemicals because they're stationary. They have to sit where they are. So if they're attacked by a herbivore, that's an animal that eats plants, they have to do something about it, because otherwise they'll get eaten up. Some plants produce stings, like stinging nettles, or cacti that produce spines, but most plants actually produce an amazing array of different chemicals, and these have lots of different activities against maybe chewing insects or biting insects that might come and feed off the plants. And it's my interest in those chemicals and the fact that they're also produced in the pollen and nectar that's made it interesting to people that are interested in pollinators. And they have an array of different activities. Some of them are actually able to improve bee memory. So caffeine, which occurs in the nectar of coffee and citrus flowers, actually enhances the capacity of bees to form memories for good food sources, which is just amazing. You know, if a bee is caffeinated, or if its food is caffeinated, it makes much stronger memories for food, so that maybe the next day when it goes out foraging, it will recognize a smell from that caffeinated plant and return to it. And that, of course, is a little bit like drugging the bees, because it makes them more likely to revisit the same plant species, therefore more likely to pollinate it, because it'll transfer pollen back to that flowering plant.
Because certainly honeybees have a reputation for constancy, don't they?
They do.
For going back to the same
That's right.
plant.
Yeah, memory is a really important attribute, not just for honeybees, but also bumblebees. Even, I mean, lots of insects have good memory, but they use that as a way of improving and enhancing their foraging efficiency, make themselves more effective at collecting food.
So these are the drugs that you're referring to in the talk. And did sex come into it as well?
Well, sex, of course, is the pollination. Rather disappointingly, it's much less sensational than the title might suggest. But
so it's got nothing
nice...
to do with the actual bee reproductive cycle.
No,
more to do with the success for the plants.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a. I'm taking liberties really with the phraseology, but it's still a nice opportunity to get the word sex and drugs into the same title with some kind of semblance of reality. But the drug side of things, of course, has two elements to it. With caffeine, it is effectively drugging the bees because it's having a pharmacological effect on them. It's enhancing their ability to form memories and making them more efficient pollinators of that one plant species. But there's also another side to it, which is the other part, and perhaps the main part of the talk I gave, which is around the chemicals in nectar that appear to be pharmaceuticals for bees. They have a sort of a pharmaceutical property. They're biologically active against important parasites of bees. And so when bees are out foraging in the landscape and they're feeding on these special plants, they're actually consuming a medicine or a drug. So it's a way of them actually maybe managing the disease burden and making themselves and the nest more healthy.
So it's an indirect effect. It's an effect.
I would say it's a direct. I would say it's a
chemical
direct
on the
effect.
parasite.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a direct effect on the parasite.
So should that influence a beekeeper or a bee supporter who is interested in plants to plant things that not only favour pollination and feeding the insect population, but also in keeping them healthy?
Yes, I mean, I would love to be able to say, here are a whole bunch of plants. These are the ones you want your bees to be feeding on. But at the moment, we're just not there yet. We're really, this is cutting edge. We literally have published on three or four species of plants that we know have these properties in ecologically relevant concentrations. So the kind of concentrations where a bee would go and feed and actually have a pharmaceutical benefit, if you like. We just don't have the information. What I would say, though, is the species that we have worked on are quite widely occurring. Perhaps the one we've worked on the most is Calluna vulgaris, ling heather. And of course, that's very widely abundant in some parts of the country, perhaps less so in the south. We're losing a lot of our lowland heaths, which is a great shame because we're losing this really important nectar resource. But if you've got honeybees and you've got access to upland or even lowland heaths where you've got heather, I think that's a good plant. And I'd be curious to know if there was any anecdotes from anyone that suggested that bees that were feeding off Calluna heather were more healthy than when they were feeding on other plants. I mean, that would be a very interesting thing for me.
Well, whether or not you take your bees to the heather flowering is seasonal. It's noted to be late in the season in this part of the world. I don't know about heather outside the UK, but do you have any evidence that beneficial effects from feeding on heather last the bee throughout the rest of the season when heather isn't flowering?
No, we don't yet. So
is that because you haven't looked, or because
it's because we haven't looked? We haven't had a chance. I mean, we're only just now getting out into testing at colony level. All the work we've done up to now has been on whole bees. It's not just in a petri dish. It's bees, and we're giving them these nectar compounds, and it does seem to be having a beneficial effect. But what we don't know, or we just been finding out recently, is that they have effects at the colony level as well. So with bumblebee nests, if they're provided with Calluna heather as part of their food source, they have a much lower Crithidia count. Crithidia is this parasite that bumblebees get, compared to ones that are just feeding on an artificial nectar, a sugar solution, effectively.
And does this also have an effect on other species of bees and other parasites of theirs?
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know yet. Actually, we're looking to find out. It would be really interesting, though, to work more with honeybee keepers, because I know there are lots of disease problems. I mean, one of the ones that we have worked on in bumblebees is Nosema bombi, and we know that there are compounds in nectars that are biologically active against that organism, and we know there's a related species, Nosema in honeybees, and so it might be that information that we've got on bumblebee microsporidians is relevant to the honeybee community as well. But I'd be very happy to sort of develop collaborations with honeybee keeping communities to try and see if we can find ways of experimenting, I guess, and seeing if we can get some of these compounds or honeys in those hives to see if we can reduce the incidence of disease.
So you mentioned that we're a long way yet from being able to recommend that gardeners, for instance, grow certain plants that would encourage health from the nectar that they produce in the insect populations. Do you think this is something that will come in the future?
Yes, I'm absolutely certain it will. What I can say, I mean, because we don't have evidence yet of an actual field effect, we only have evidence from our individual bees, but we do know that there are some species that have these benefits. So Calluna heather is one. If you've got Calluna heather, why don't use it? Ericas, actually, it seems other Erica species which are related to Calluna are also producing these. But there are other species that we've worked on, such as Arbutus unido, which is the strawberry tree, and that's becoming increasingly common in urban landscapes. It's a tree that's probably well suited to a warmer, drier Britain, so actually probably a climate smart tree. And also Tilia species. We've got good evidence from lime flower trees that they produce compounds that are beneficial from a disease point of view for both bumblebees and potentially honeybees, because we know they both feed on that food
And lime
source.
produces quite a nice honey, doesn't it?
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's such a lot of nectar. I mean, it's a huge resource, and in fact, we're getting much more interested in actually the value of trees. You know, if you think of a flower bed, it's two-dimensional, it's flat, it just takes up loads of ground. And when you've got a tree that's just going up into the sky, it's 360 and producing huge amounts of nectar. We really need to start paying more attention to the importance of tree species as sources of food, not just for honeybees, but lots of other pollinators too.
Well, that's really interesting. So going forwards, there are going to be recommendations that you can make. And
well, I hope so.
Did you want to encourage any samples of any particular honey, or
well, one of the
things
that's really challenging from a scientific point of view is working with nectar. If you haven't tried to collect it, try. It's very unforgiving, and honeybees and other pollinators are very good at collecting nectar, and so we rely very much on honeybees and the hard work they do in collecting these monofloral nectars. So all the work I've done so far, where we've been feeding bees with nectar chemicals, we're not feeding them from nectar, we're feeding them from honey, because that's monofloral honey, which is a proxy for the nectar. But we know it's the right stuff because we can do chemical analysis of the nectar, the tiny amounts that we can get from the flowers, and compare it to the honey. And that's a kind of a more sophisticated way, I guess, of demonstrating that something is monofloral. But that's the only way we can get bulk amounts of these compounds to test. So we're always interested if anyone's got any unusual monofloral honeys they think their bees have been collecting. The ones that we can get are fairly typical, obviously heather and lavender honey we've tried, echium or Viper's bugloss, I think, is another one, and Erica honeys. So we've tried a few, but if anyone thinks they've got an unusual honey and they can spare a little jar, give us a chance to have a look and see if there's something interesting in it. Most of them will have something interesting. And the reason I think most of these honeys have something interesting, more than just the sweet, the sugar, is because it's a very expensive gift for the plant. They're making a lot of this sugary substance to persuade visitors to the flower, and in doing so they're expending a lot of energy, and if they do that and loads of bacteria get in there or loads of yeasts get in there and just convert all that sugar to alcohols and acids and it's wasted, then all that energy is wasted. So what we think is that they're producing this amazing array of chemicals in the nectar as well to keep it protected, so that it's only good for the bees or other pollinators too.
So it's only good for their own health and continuation of their own species.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh,
that's been really interesting. Thank you for the lecture.
Okay.
And if you didn't manage to get to the show and hear Phil's lecture yourself, you'll be able to catch up on the National Honey Show YouTube channel during the next year. And so we hope that you'll join us for the rest of the lectures, the rest of the show, and that you enjoy the show while you're here.
Thanks.